Welcome to everyone joining in live, and thank you to everyone listening to this recording. So this is a recording of an online meeting, and right now I and the other participants are doing this practice called tuning in to the healing stream, to life energy, positive, natural, healing life energy. And you can do the same as well while you're listening to this. If you sit with your feet flat on the floor, hands on your legs, palms facing upwards, and observe your body, having the intention to take in this positive life energy. It's really as simple as that, being open, having the will, and then observing the body, giving away negative thoughts and letting go of other thoughts. So you can do that throughout this entire meeting and while listening to this recording. So here's a quote from Bruno Groening about how to practice this thing called tuning in. How to practice Einstellen is the German word. And you must really open yourself to the good. Devote yourself to God. And you must take in the true divine transmission within yourself. God is the sender. Man is the receiver. If you don't tune into it, you cannot receive the wavelength of the sender. God gives us all the good, but we must take in all that is His, that He sends us into ourselves. So do it. So Bruno Groening, well, in the one sense, he used the metaphor of a radio and described us, our soul, actually, as like an antenna. He once said like a satellite dish. That there's a part of our being, a very deep part of our being, that's receptive, that can take in positive energy. And he said that humanity has forgotten this. You find this idea throughout history in different cultures. And yet, according to Bruno Groening, this practice of taking in energy is of prime importance to us during our time here on Earth. Here's what he says about it. The body not only consists of food and drink, but that it needs the spiritual divine power as well. It needs the power that God has determined for you, for your body. So, it was a key part of Bruno Groening's teaching, not only that this energy is helpful and healing and feels good, but that we actually need it to thrive. As he said here, it's what God has determined for our body. He also would say what God has ordained. Can you imagine what it would be like to come to this planet and realize that human beings had forgotten that they need air to breathe, and to go around and try and tell them that? Tell them one of the most fundamental aspects of life. Well, that's kind of what Bruno Groening's mission was. I mean, he did many things and he taught many things, and he came to remind us of some very simple, fundamental aspects of life that, as a whole, humanity had forgotten. And this is one of them. So let's spend a little time in silence, attuning ourselves to God, attuning ourselves to this energy. through having this intention and observing our bodies. So while this practice is receiving, Bruno Groening is quite clear that it's also active. He says, if you don't tune into it, you cannot receive the wavelength of the sender. And he also says, you must take in the true divine transmission into yourselves. So, while being receptive is on the one hand passive, there is an active component. The German word for einstellen, which gets translated as tuning in, has many meanings. One of them is to focus. Another is to take in. Another is to tune, like you tune a radio station to a particular. Another is to attune ourselves. So part of this practice is, in a sense, passive. Like we're not trying to heal ourselves. We're trying to take in this energy and let it heal us. However, it does require a kind of effort, a kind of focus. As I like to say often, to quote Bruno, he said, welcome the peaceful quiet in describing how to do this. Welcome the peaceful quiet and have the will to absorb positive energy. Having the will. Will is a very strong word. It's like our deepest drive. And engaging our will isn't just about receiving positive energy. It also is one of the other fundamental things which we as a race have forgotten. We're starting to remember, and that's the power of thought. Here's what Bruno Groening said. Man acts according to his will. As his will, so his thought. The thought moves a human to deed. So there's two very important things there. Why do we do what we do? According to Bruno Groening, it's because of our thoughts. How do we then change our thoughts? According to Bruno Groening, we have to engage our will. As his will, so his thought. And the thought moves a human to deeds. So if we want to change our deeds, we have to change our thoughts. And if we want to change our thoughts, we have to engage our will. And have what Bruno Groening called the will to good. Or goodwill. How important is this goodwill, will to good? Here's what Bruno Groening said. The soul can be compared to a wonderful, beautiful flower about the size of my open palm. When a person wants what is good, their soul then opens just like a satellite dish, and the divine energy streams into it fully. But if a person takes up just a single bad thought, then their soul shuts itself up at once, and the connection to God is interrupted. The soul is therefore the receiving device for the healing stream. A good will opens the mirror of the soul, and the power can flow. But it will not let in even the tiniest bad feeling, because it will shut itself up as quick as lightning. So the soul is where the divine spark is located in human beings, to which no evil can gain access. It is for this reason that I'm always saying, in this world there are no bad people, from a spiritual point of view, but only when people with bad habits. So if we engage what he calls a good will, or if we want what is good, then this positive divine energy streams into us. However, if we, and he says, take up a single negative thought, and our thoughts in general will be more positive, and negative thoughts appear. And then if we take up a negative thought, then that connection to God closes off. So it's so important to have this will for the good, and then to watch our thoughts and not take in and not receive, because thoughts appear to us, right? We're walking down the street and we have the most random thoughts. It's not like we create them. However, we do respond to them. And Bruno Groening said, when you're strong and full of energy, then it's much easier to literally repel these negative thoughts. So what we're talking about here is some of Bruno's most fundamental teachings, that there is this energy, how to take it in, the importance of taking it in, and the importance of thought, and the importance of warding off negative thoughts, and the need for this energy to be strong to ward off those thoughts, and engaging our will to bring this energy in. so that we are connected to God and we feel good. And then from that good place, it's easy to ward off these negative thoughts. So everything I just said, and these are just Bruno's teachings. They're not complicated. They're spoken in an everyday language that, someone who had no exposure to any spiritual or religious teaching could understand them. And yet, on another level, they're very radical, or I don't want to say radical, but we as a species have forgotten these things, and we certainly as a species we're not living by them. So he came to remind us of the very basic fundamentals of what he called the rules of the game of life. How to live well. Want the good. Have a good will. Take in good energy. Take in good thoughts. Ward off negative thoughts. Just those three things. Any one of those three things, much less those three things together. Will, energy, mindfulness of thoughts. We could dedicate, those three things could change a life. They've changed my life. Just one of them. At first, when I found this teaching, I didn't really take the other things very seriously. I just did a lot of tuning in, a lot of Einstellen. I kind of listened to the other ideas. But just that, taking in this energy, completely changed, in a sense, my destiny. It saved my life. My body was a wreck. And how much more powerful to then also engage our will and watch our thoughts. This path has been a little humbling for me. I have a bachelor's in comparative religion, meaning in college I studied a lot of different religions and from a scholarly perspective, and then I spent before I found this teaching, another 20 years on my own, passionately studying different and practicing different traditions and teachings, and I thought I was exceptionally, and in a sense I was exceptionally well educated in the realms of spirituality and religion. And yet my life was a mess on so many levels, especially my health. And on top of all those things, I had studied all these different systems of healing and health. So I had a lot of knowledge. And I come to Bruno Groening's teaching because I was desperate. And it's like, observe your body, take in positive energy. Want the good, engage your will. Watch out for negative thoughts, reject negative thoughts, don't take them in. Reject doesn't mean fight them, it means not taking them in. It's a kind of fight, but not the fight that normally And I didn't know what to think. I mean, this guy was speaking words that a kindergartner could understand, right? I'm used to scholars and people using flowery language and deep philosophy, and Bruno Groening's like, observe your body, watch your thoughts, and want the good. If we add on to that, trust and have faith in God. like that's almost his whole teaching. I mean, there's many more details. And it took me a while to let go of all that I'd learned. Not so much let go, but just realize that actually I didn't know very much. Like, I had a lot of information. But what did I really know? So this path is very humbling because it requires us to get really simple, to want the good, to take in this positive energy through observing our body. To watch our thoughts like our life depends on it. Now, our literal life doesn't depend on it. One negative thought isn't going to kill us, but if we take in and believe one negative thought, Bruno Groening says we become a servant of evil. And we've all experienced that, having one negative thought, and then another one comes, and then another one comes, and next thing you know, we're in an awful mood, and then when we're in a bad mood, well, just like Bruno said, the thought moves man to deed. Then we do things that we later regret, and it becomes a vicious cycle. And then to have faith and trust, just like a little child does. It's like Bruno Groening, it'd be like Bruno Groening, a teacher shows up and humanity had forgotten to eat, drink, and breathe. And this teacher's like, okay, take a breath. Okay, have some food. And the teacher's like, okay, have some water. And the people are like, come on, teach us a mantra, or give us some philosophy, and then to boot, he was persecuted. For just reminding us of just the simple things that we all need to do. So let's put some of these things into practice. Wanting the good, observing our body, opening up to this energy, having faith in this energy and faith in the sender being God. And then watch our thoughts. And we have to find out for ourselves. Here's what Bruno says about thoughts. It is through oneself that man is either built up or destroyed. In the armory of his thoughts, he is forging the weapons which add to his own downfall. In the very same way, he's creating the tools that bring heavenly homes of joy, power, and peace for himself. Because planning with God's power means thinking well. So let's put these very simple instructions into practice. observing the body, having the intention to take in this good power, wanting the good, having faith and trust in an infinite God, and watching our thoughts with a hawk's eye. So what does it mean to want the good? The goodwill, the will to good. Because when I first heard that, it's like, well, I want the good. So we all want the good in moments, but what about wanting it ongoing? And what about only wanting the good? Bruno Groening was quite adamant that we had to make a firm determination to not have anything in common with evil any further, any longer in our lives. Now there's many concepts of what evil is, and this is the other, maybe the one other fundamental, if we're going to get down to the basics of what Bruno Groening taught. And here's what he said about evil. The divine power builds up, but the evil, devilish, satanic power tears down. So while there are many ideas out there, what's good, what's evil? Bruno Groening was talking about two forces. One force that's constructive, one force that's destructive. One force that leads to happiness, health, and harmony. Another force that leads to misery, disease, and disorder. So he keeps it really simple. And that knowledge that these two things exist and to choose to choose the good, to want the good, to the will to good, is of utmost importance. Here's what he said about how deeply. Now, what I'm about to read is, in a sense, what we're aiming towards, because it's a very. I'll just read it. He was speaking to a woman named Mrs. Haas. Miss Haas, and this is from Powers of the Spirit, page 214. You must take up the divine power more consciously and must yearn for it in the same way as people have a desire for their beloved partners. You certainly know how that is. When a husband and wife stand facing one another, the husband then feels a strong longing for his wife in his body. And on the other side, the wife desires her husband. These are the most powerful feelings in human life, and they are in essence the driving force for new life. But life is God, and therefore the feeling between the two sexes are also of a divine nature. If therefore anyone would like to attain the connection to God, they must yearn for it with a spiritual longing that is just as unconditional as that for a beloved person. Yearn for the good, to yearn for this divine energy. Many mystics in many different traditions talk about the need for her to have a burning desire for God. As it's written that Christ said, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God." That we have to make that, in a sense, our number one priority. And that when we do that, everything else falls into order. Because God is order and the giver of order, and this energy restores order and heals and removes disorder. So I sometimes think, I like to think in metaphors. If this stunningly beautiful woman showed up at my doorstep and said, hey, I have the answer to all of your problems, every health challenge, every type of suffering you've ever experienced. And I know how to give you an amazing life beyond your wildest dreams of order and harmony and service and fun and joy. And then she says, would you like to go out with me? The answer is pretty obvious, right? So, minus the, physical attractiveness piece, that's basically what God is. That which has the answer to all of our problems, including our health problems. That which can lead our lives into, we can't even fathom what's possible. And then to boot, it's the source of happiness, health, and order. And God's like, hey, you wanna hang out? But we have to yearn for God because we can't necessarily see God with our eyes. We can see the creation and we can see the beauty of nature. And certainly that beauty in nature points us towards the beauty that God is and can help fire up our yearning. So let's yearn, want, desire the good. observing the body, engaging our yearning for the good, yearning for divine energy, having faith that for God nothing is impossible, and watching our thoughts, giving away the negative ones and letting the other ones go. Yearning for God. Why yearn for God? Well, once we get sick and tired of suffering and illness, and once we realize that God is the antidote to those things, it gets easier. However, there's another reason too. Bruno Groening said, "People call me master." Well, what is a master? Someone who knows their trade. I want all of you to become masters of life. So on this path, what's offered to us is happiness and health, but also a life that's guided by God. And yet there's even more. Bruno Groening said, and first a little context. So for those who are new to this, Bruno Groening was one of, if not the greatest healer that ever walked this earth. Large crowds of people would gather, and mass healings would occur, like scenes out of the Bible. Blind people would regain their vision. Paralyzed people would stand up. People with cancer, the cancer would just vanish. And it wasn't that Bruno Groening did a particular technique on them. He just talked to them and radiated this divine energy, sent it out, and taught them how to receive it. and taught them these simple truths of life. So with that said, here's a quote from Bruno Groening. I believe I've given you the most important thing for your path, in that I wish you with all my heart all that is divinely possible, and much love. Believe that I am nothing more than your helper. Believe, dear friends, that I am nothing more than a servant of God, which you can also be, if you want to be, if you only do it. And believe, dear friends, that I am nothing more than a tool of God, which in reality you are also, which you are not yet able to believe. So, it's very easy to put Bruno Groening up on a pedestal. While he was in his body, hundreds of thousands, we don't know how many miracles occurred. And since he's left his body, hundreds of thousands more, we don't know how many. So it's very easy to put him above us. It's very easy to worship him. And yet, Bruno Groening says that he's just a servant of God. That he's just a tool of God. Now that in and of itself is amazing. In the world, if someone achieves something great, then we all think they are great, and that person probably thinks, wow, I'm great. I've achieved this and this and that. And yet here's this person who was able to do what no one else could do. Christ was able to do it. These things happen occasionally around other spiritual teachers. Occasionally there's a being like Bruno or Christ where healings happen over and over and over again. And then occasionally these, I've heard stories of different spiritual teachers where healings happen. They're just not very common, but they do happen. But here's this person who could do what in a sense no one else could do. And he said, I'm just a servant of God. I'm a tool. He said, I am nothing. God is everything. In and of that self, that is amazing. That was his attitude. And in fact, that attitude he calls all of us to, reminds all of us of. But he takes it a step further. He says that he is nothing more than a servant of God, which you can also be. He says, I'm nothing more than a tool of God, which in reality you are also, which you are not yet able to believe. So Bruno Groening has a very important message for how to live life well. We've gone over that today. To engage our will, our desire, our yearning for the good. To receive this positive energy and to believe and trust that God and this energy can do anything. To distinguish between good and evil. And to firmly decide to disconnect from the evil and connect and stay connected to God. To watch our thoughts. Because our lives, according to Bruno Groening, are directly, not necessarily we hear this talk of that our thoughts manifest or create our reality. Bruno Groening doesn't quite say that. He doesn't deny that, but what he says is your thoughts is what moves you to deeds. And of course, our deeds is what creates our life and our destiny here on this earth, is the actions we take over and over. So those are his basic instructions for how to live life. And then he takes it a step further. He models for us the path of humility, this recognition of how small we are and how big God is. And then he asks us to believe what seems impossible to believe. That there's, in the end, we're not different from Bruno Groening. We're just not yet able to believe. Bruno Groening said that what he is, we are. That we can be. He gives us some very good news in a sense. And this was part of early Christianity. This idea called theosis. That we're all on this path to becoming more and more like Christ. More and more divine. Or shall we say, to embody that or live that or express that. I mean, I'm quoting Bruno Groening here, and I feel like I'm committing some kind of blasphemy. I'll read it again. Believe me that I am nothing more than your helper. Believe, dear friends, that I am nothing more than a servant of God, which you can also be if you want to be, if you only do it. And believe, dear friends, that I am nothing more than a tool of God, which in reality you are also, which you are not yet able to believe. So I'm just quoting Bruno Groening, and a part of me is shaking, like, oh no, have I done something wrong to say that I am, and all of us here, and maybe, and I assume everyone is on this path to becoming like Bruno Groening, which is to become like Christ. And yet, that's written in the Bible that Christ said, these things and greater shall you do. Greater. So what is our destiny? Who can say how vast it is? Bruno Groening calls us to become masters of life. And in the simplest language I think I've ever heard, he tells us how to do it. And then, as if all of this isn't enough, there's more, or there's one piece more. Bruno is here to help us on this path. He calls himself a helper and a friend. He says, here's a quote from him, "If you still cannot have faith today, then I will do it for you until you truly have faith. And if you still cannot ask, if you still cannot pray today, then I will do that for you as well. Make yourselves free of that which you have experienced as suffering. I am helping you. And this help leads to your health and salvation, leads you onto the path onto which Christ, our Savior, has led us. And that is what makes us holy." So not only has Bruno Groening given us the simplest instructions I've ever heard on how to live life, he'll also help us learn them. And he'll believe for us until we're able to. And he says that his help will lead to salvation. And that's for each one of us to look into our hearts and see if we believe that to be true, if we trust that. It's written that Christ called his message the gospel. But actually, gospel's a Latin word. He didn't speak Latin, but the Greek word that comes from, it means good news. And Bruno Groening says he came to remind us of the teachings of Christ. And I say to remind us of this good news, that help is available. And that we're all on this path that leads to something that as yet we can't probably fathom. Or who of us can fathom what it would be like to be like Bruno Groening or like Christ? And yet Bruno Groening says, in fact, we are just like Bruno Groening. We just don't believe yet. We've forgotten. I can't think of the exact words, but he said that we can't even begin to imagine the goodness and abundance God has in store for us. And I'm personally willing to take that on faith. And I sure want to find out what that is. So thank you so much for joining in. And thank you to everyone listening to this recording. I wish you much divine energy, peace, healing, and the desire for the good. Take care. Much love.